So you just learned a bunch of critical thinking. What now? Hey there, I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and in today's video we're going to do a wrap up on some of the things that we've covered during this series of lectures on critical thinking. If you are one of the students in my class, then as we've been going through these 8 weeks, you've encountered a lot of different topics and you've encountered a lot of new ideas. If you're someone who is watching this video from YouTube, maybe from the playlist, or you've just stumbled across it, welcome to the video as well. I hope that some of the things we'll discuss will be helpful to you as you think about your life and think about philosophy and think about critical thinking. So if you're one of the students in my course, you've probably heard me use the phrase, the great conversation, right? College education, as you know it, is your introduction to the great conversation. It is your chance to connect to this dialogue that's been happening since the days of Plato and Socrates, right? It's a great honor to be included in this long history, in this prestigious world of connection to the past. And we always have to remember, we always have to keep in mind that as we're going through our lives, everything that we're doing is built on a history. It's built on a foundation. So in this course, we've talked about some of the history of some of these different ideas, and we've talked about some of the history of critical thinking, but hopefully you can take some of these things that you've learned throughout this course to allow you to apply them to your own life, to your future studies, right? It doesn't matter if you're studying philosophy, studying management, studying math, studying science. The thing you have to remember is that all this stuff comes from somewhere. It didn't just poof out of nowhere, right? And that you, being someone that's studying it, you are invited to that conversation. You're invited to contribute. And as you go farther along your courses and as you get higher up in your education, the more you will be asked to contribute until at some point you're the one writing the theories, you're the one doing the studies, you're the one who's part of the textbooks. So I hope that you take it with the amount of seriousness and reverence that you should, you know, and when you think about it, that's the reason why we do a lot of the things we do, right? That's the reason that we cite and reference people, is because we want other people to know. We want our readers to know that we're part of that conversation. We're part of the we're part of the cool club, right? We have been invited to, and we follow the rules of the conversation. Not too long ago, I read Immanuel Kant's book on education. And in it, he references other people. He compares and contrasts his ideas with theirs. He talks about how his ideas build on their ideas. So don't feel like as you're going through college that you're not a part of the conversation, because you are. And you need to honor that by making sure that you're appropriately citing and referencing people as you go. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about what we've covered specifically in this course. We had 8 weeks. We covered a handful of different subjects. First, we talked about arguments and persuasion. We talked about some of those ways which someone might present arguments to you and how they might try to persuade you to some course of action. We talked about how important it is to be a critical thinker, to think in a structured and logical way, to think about things with a process and not just use our first assumptions, right? Next, we talked about tools of argument. We talked about some of the things which we might use to figure things out. We talked about validity and soundness. We talked about inductive force. We talked about persuasiveness, right? We talked about how we can look at an argument and tell if it's deductively valid. Next, we went more into detail with deduction. We talked about how arguments that are valid and sound are such that the premises are always true and then the conclusion is true, right? If it's valid and sound, the conclusion cannot be false if the premises are true, because they have that implicature from one to the next. Next, we talked about induction and probability. We talked about inductive force and we talked about probability. An argument that's not valid and sound can be more or less forceful. It can be the case that you're presented with an argument that is very convincing, but you could also be presented with an argument that's not convincing. And with inductive force comes probability, because the more likely something is to occur, the more convincing it will be. Next, we talked about argument reconstruction. We talked about the fact that once we're presented with an argument, we need to reconstruct it so that we understand what they're saying. We need to add in any implicit premises that may not be verbally or stated in writing, right? So argument reconstruction is very important. Then we talked about argument assessment. That's the next step after reconstruction, right? We reconstruct the argument and then we assess, is it good? Is it bad? Do the premises imply from one another? Do they have a good structure? Do they have a good form, right? Next, we talked about things such as logical fallacies. We talked about some of the really common ones, such as the red herring or the tu quoque. We talked about ad hominems, and we talked about how we might respond if we're presented with one of these fallacies, right? What techniques you want to use in an argument to respond to them. Next, we talked about knowledge, justification, and true belief. So for you to know something, it has to be the case that you believe it, that it's true, and that you've come to that belief in the right way. You know, if you take a bunch of drugs and you hallucinate that your mother's house is burning, and then it just so happens that the house is actually burning, and you believe it, that doesn't imply knowledge, right? You have to come to the knowledge in the right way at the right time. And there's a lot of debate when it comes to, you know, knowledge, justification, and true belief. It's one of those things that does affect us in the real world. It does affect us in our day-to-day lives. And it's something that philosophers still debate heartily, you know. Now that we've covered everything we've talked about so far in the course, let's talk a little bit about why you should study philosophy. Philosophy is one of those fields of study where the more that you put into it, the more that you'll get out of it. It is one of those fields of study where it might not seem like it has a lot of relevance to your day-to-day life, but it really does. Philosophy helps you figure out some of the most important questions with your life, such as how do I want to live? What do I want to do for a living? What are my values? Who's important to me? How do I know what I believe? Where should I make my stand? What should be the thing that motivates me? What drives me? And these are questions that philosophy helps you confront every day. These are questions that philosophy helps you find the answer to. For the people that look at a philosophy degree and say, well, it's completely useless, there's no point, you're wasting your time. Well, let me just remind you, you can study a lot of things that seem like they have a lot of relevance and then them not lead to career success. You can study business, you can study marketing, you can study mathematics and still not find career success. In many cases, career success doesn't come as much from the degree that you've earned. And that's not to say that all degrees are created equal, but that is to say whether or not you do well in the world and whether or not you make tons of money and have the good life you want has more to do with who your parents are and who you've made friends with than anything you learn in college. So with that being said, I think philosophy is a great field of study. I think it's one that's very enlightening, and I think it's one that's relevant to our lives today. It's something that if you take the time to learn philosophy, it will benefit you. Now, does that mean that you have to go get a degree in philosophy? No. But I do hope you'll at least take the time to continue reading philosophy, read some philosophy books, watch philosophy videos. Try to make an effort to keep philosophy in your life, even if you're not studying it academically. So what are my recommendations for your next steps? I recommend for your next steps that you read as many old books as you can, preferably philosophy books, but really try to read these books that have been around a long time. They've had generations of great readers, and try and add your voice to that, right? One of the best books I've read recently was Up From Slavery, the Booker T. Washington story. Was that a philosophy book? No. But did it have something important to say about how we should live our lives? Yes. Yes, it did. It was a fantastic book. And I would recommend to you, dear reader, dear viewer, that you take the time to read some really old books, to read some books that other people have read and other people have put thought into. Because just reading new books or not reading any books at all or just watching YouTube, that's going to hurt you in the long run. It's going to make it to where you aren't experiencing the depth of human culture and human society. And my next recommendation is, if you're still a college student, try and take some of the hardest classes you can. If your school has an honors program, or if you are at a place like AMU, try and take harder classes. Try and really stretch your mental muscles, because most people will only get to go to college once in their life. They'll only get to go for one degree. And if you're only going for one degree, then get your money's worth out of it. Don't cheat. Don't use AI. Don't take shortcuts. Do it the hard way. Do it the long way. And learn as much as you can. With that being said, I'd love to hear more from you in the comments. If you're a student in my class, I'd love to hear from you, keep in touch with you, and I hope this video has been helpful to you. You have a wonderful day. Thank you.